Greetings everyone, it's Anna. I hope you're all doing well. Today we are discussing Jade City by Fonda Lee, which is a book that has been, I'm not gonna lie, quite difficult for me to get through. It took me 2 months to read this. I just didn't really know how to feel about this book, and I kind of still don't. I think I have a better grasp of how I feel, and I'm leaning more towards that I didn't like it, but I will kind of express those thoughts in a bit more detail in this review. So for this review, it's going to be spoiler free and then spoilery towards whenever I finish the spoiler free section, but obviously I will let you know, and I will probably do like a chapter thingy so you can click on the timestamp and it will take you to the spoilery section if you want to skip to that, because there are some points I need to talk in detail about, because we need to discuss. So Jade City is an Asian inspired fantasy book set in a sort of modern urban fantasy type of setting, and we have two families who are kind of at loggerheads with each other. You've got the Mountain and you have the No Peaks, who are the family that we follow in the story. So they don't really get on, but they used to at some point. So with this story, it's a lot of things simmering within the beginning of the story, and certain events take place that kind of kicks off the book. So that's sort of a brief summary. It's sort of gangster inspired. I've heard it say that it's The Godfather inspired. I've never watched The Godfather. Is it a book? I don't know. I've never watched The Godfather, so I can't really say. But in my mind, I was thinking like crime family, lots of people of disrepute, perhaps morally grey characters. That's kind of what I had in my head. So that's kind of a segue to lead into the world building and kind of where my biggest gripes lay with this book. I think that Lee wrote a very, very good world. It was built well, that you had a lot of lore. There's religions in this world. You've got history of the war, and it kind of reminded me of like World War II guerrilla warfare, when she talked about the past of, the grandfather's past, and how they started off the clans, and to build from how they were in the mountains and trying to fight off the invading parties to what they were now. I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and if she wrote a prequel that talked about or went into detail about what the grandfathers went through during that time, I would actually be really keen to read that, because from the snippets that we got about the history, I was fascinated. Even things like that, so the lore of the world, the religion, I think she wrote a very well built out world, with rules and regulations that you understood perfectly within that. So my issue here, where it kind of comes in for me, is that I'm not really an urban fantasy fan. So you're probably wondering, why did you pick it up? I have been interested to read Jade City from the beginning of this year, and then I've always kind of been interested in picking it up. Then I found out it was urban fantasy, but I was still kind of interested in it, but I wasn't so fussed about getting to it. But there's so much love for it on my timeline from a lot of the mutuals that I have on Twitter and things like that. So it kind of prompted me to finally pick it up, because I promise you, I have not heard one negative thing about this book. So I thought, you know what, seeing as I haven't heard any polarizing opinion, it's unanimous in the love people have for it, let me pick it up. For me, I like urban fantasy that is, if we're going to do modern, I need for everything to be magical. And this is where my second gripe comes in, which is the magic system. I didn't like the magic system in this book, purely because it's not very interesting. So when the wearer of Jade uses it, it enhances abilities that they have. So they have to train a lot in academies to be able to channel the power that the Jade brings them. So they learn martial arts, and they learn to be able to control these powers so that it doesn't cause them problems as they acquire more Jade. But it's not a very interesting or exciting magic system. I made this point when I was discussing this with Tolani, because essentially if we if Jade was named something else, if Jade was just or happened to be a performance enhancing drug, it doesn't change the story in any way, shape, or form. And for me personally, I like magic systems that are all encompassing, and that goes along with urban fantasy as well. I don't want to have to think of an urban fantasy setting and try to compare it to what we have now. If we're doing urban fantasy, I need you to wave at that guy and he's like a giant salamander. Like, I need the fantasy to be everywhere if it's urban fantasy, because that way it's a lot easier for me to be sucked into this world. And because the fantasy was so very light, it was very difficult for me to really get sucked into the story. It really didn't feel very much different to a world that we live in now. It was very easy for me to imagine the world because I think Lee's writing is very descriptive, and it allows the reader to really imagine the world. Because for me, I've never been to Hong Kong, but I was kind of imagining parts of Kekon or Janloon as like Hong Kong in areas, and also Singapore a lot. Because I've been to Singapore, so that's kind of what I had in my mind when I was imagining it. But for me, urban fantasy, I need all of the urban to be fantasy. Also for the magic system to be a lot more. I don't really like light fantasies. Like, a lot of the fantasy books that I really didn't like this year that I've read had very light levels of fantasy, like Priest of Bones, and I can't remember the Binding. Wasn't too fond of their magic systems. I need everything to be magical. I need a teacup to say hi to me. I need fantasy. Now obviously those things that I mentioned are very specific to me and my taste as a fantasy reader. If those don't bother you, then you'll probably really enjoy it, because like I said, Lee's writing is superb, and I can't fault her writing in terms of the world that she has built, outside of the things that I didn't particularly like. Now let's talk about the characters, because I know that people have their fan favourites. Because we mainly follow the No Pete's family, we follow obviously the kids and the grandkids and the families over there. I had my favourites from there, and I also had other favourites within the book as well. I know that everybody loves Hilo, so let's talk about Hilo. I did not like Hilo as a character at all, and so it gets to a certain point where we follow him a lot in the story. I found him to be a giant man baby, and I know that he's supposed to be like this brute character who, you know, wears his heart on his sleeve and will kind of run into situations because brotherhood and standing up for people and having people's backs. I just found the way that he dealt with situations very childish, and I don't know if it was supposed to be cute. Perhaps it was. I didn't find it very cute at all. But I know everybody loves Hilo. I just didn't particularly. I really liked Shay, who was Hilo's sister, because I found her problems to be a lot more relatable. And also Lan as well. I could relate to Lan. So Lan, Hilo and Shay, they're all like siblings. I could relate to Lan more obviously as an elder sibling and having the pressures that he has on himself there. But also Shay is someone who is trying to find herself a little bit more in life and where she wants to be and what she wants to do outside of the family that everybody knows her for. So those are the two characters that I really liked and really related to. I saw an interview with Fonda Lee where she said that she really enjoyed writing Hilo. If I'm going to be honest, I feel like it really showed, because I think that even though I did like quite a few of the characters, I could tell that a lot of time was put into building Hilo as a character. So some of the other people within the book, to me, just felt a little bit more flat. If we spent more time kind of giving them a bit more personality, I think that they could have benefited from that just a tad bit more. On the opposite side of the No Pete's cool family, you have the Mountain Clan, and those are the antagonists through the book. And I'm gonna just say this, I stan Aunt Mada. I really liked her as a character, and I really wish we got her perspective in this story, because, or do you know what, actually, I'm just going to say it. I feel like the book should have been from her perspective the whole time. Because if I'm going to be controversial here, I think that the cool kids are really just eating off of the legacy of the grandparents, because what have you done? Okay, Aunt Mada got the memo that this was a Godfather inspired story. Okay, we've got gangsters in this story. Okay, and she's gangster. She knows what to do to get things done. That's why I stan Aunt Mada. And she could have been the grey protagonist that we all really needed in this story. But then we have the cool kids who are all confused and don't really know what to do. They didn't stand a chance against Ait. Okay, she is the one, my queen. She was always one step ahead of them, and I If you can't tell, I stan her so hard. I really, really wish we got her perspective, because coming from her, she got things done, okay? She knew how to be grey. She knew how to be wily. She knew how to be backhanded. And I loved it. Just smart at every turn. Always one step ahead of the core siblings who were all confused and always chasing their tails and left in the aftermath of whatever it is that she did. I loved Ait, and I really, really wish we got more of her, because I think she would have been a really fantastic addition to the voices in this story, because comparing her and the kids of No Peaks, they didn't even stand a chance. Ah, what a babe. And then obviously we have other periphery characters who mainly centered around the No Peaks, and you know, within the No Peaks family, they had their own familial issues that they had going on as well, because what family doesn't? Let's talk about the plot of this book, because it took me 50% of the book to really get into it. I personally felt like it plodded along a little bit. There's a lot of world building that the author is trying to do, which great, but it's an urban fantasy, and I personally don't feel like urban fantasies need as much world building as would something that's built in a way more mythical world, because obviously there's things that we're not familiar with. I know what a car is. I know certain things that this world has that I don't think really need to be explained. And I'm a big fan of stories that give me the world building as we go along. I think at some points it did kind of feel a little bit info dumping in the way that the author did it, and so I just don't really feel like we needed as much plodding as we did. Now, this book is obviously centered around Jade being called Jade City, and the use of and the acquiring of this stone, this natural substance, yet there is barely any use of said jade in the book. I can probably count on one hand how many actual fights take place in this book. Really, this is why I mentioned that if you changed out jade for a performance enhancing street drug or whatever it might be, it doesn't really change the plot, because jade isn't really used. And when Fonda Lee writes the fight scenes, Babe has 2 black belts in 2 different disciplines, okay? And it shows when she writes these fight scenes, because they are sick. They are so sick, and that's what I needed. I needed Fonda Lee to write more fight scenes. I needed this book to be more gangster. But a lot of this book is politicking. It's, let's discuss Jade. Let's fight over Jade. Oh my days, someone's stealing Jade. Let's put some restrictions on it. Let's write laws about Jade. Let's keep discussing Jade. Blah, blah, blah. Talking. Let's do some stuff with the Jades, okay? Because it's enough that we don't have really it's enough I don't really like the magic system. But now we're just constantly talking about the magical thing instead of using said magical item. It's enough, please. Let's use it. We get a bit of antagonizing here and there, bits and bobs, but it really does kick off in the second part of the book, where we get some more action, we get some more things. People remember that this is supposed to be more of a gangster story, and we're getting more gangster, and that's what I was here for, not the plodding along first half, because I was really waiting for it, where I was reading this book and I said, where is it that I will start screaming like you babes who love it as well, because I'm not there yet. So I think the plot could have been moved along a lot quicker than it actually was. It just felt way too slow and way too meandering for a story where the magic system isn't really all that encompassing in the story. The more I talk about the story, the more I realise I probably didn't really actually like it all that much. And it's weird because I don't really know how to feel 100%, because like I've mentioned several times, the writing isn't terrible. I just didn't really enjoy it a whole lot, and I don't think it was really for me. But I think from what I've mentioned, if you didn't mind some of the things, go ahead and give it a go, because I feel like I'm an outlier here, and I feel like everybody loves this book. Go into it with as little expectations as possible, because I do also feel like maybe the hype ruins it a little bit for me. So try and have your expectations just a bit lower so you can really enjoy the book properly without feeling too disappointed when you don't enjoy it. To sum up my spoiler-free thoughts on this, give it a go if you don't mind the points that I mentioned. I just don't think this was a book for me, but I don't think I should penalise a book just because of that. I gave it 4 stars out of 5 on Goodreads. I'm I think I'm going to bump that down. I'm thinking like a 3 or 2.75. That's kind of where I think it's going to go, because I don't think it's terribly written, but I think there are some parts of the book where were very obvious. I could tell that was going to happen. There was only one part in the book that I'll go to in the spoilery section that took me by surprise. Other than that, everything that happened wasn't really a big surprise to me, so it all kind of felt predictable. So I think that's where I'm going to kind of bump it down a little bit in the rating. I think the only thing that will really push me to read book 2 is the TV series, which has been optioned, and if the TV series is phenomenal, then I might give book 2 a go when they get to the second series, or if they get option for a second series, because I think this is a book, if there's anything, will be such a sick TV show for the reasons that I didn't like in the book. It's urban fantasy, which means there's not much CGI that will need to be used. Imagine this book based filmed in Singapore. The setting alone will be so sick. And also the magic system, because it's not all encompassing, because the whole world isn't magical, there again, minimal use of CGI, and you only really need to use it in the fight scenes. And because it's like being able to deflect or like kick really hard or like, you know, do whatever, stuff like rigs and pulleys can be used, so it's not gonna hopefully look too terrible. So I think if there's any book that has an adaptation coming out, and I don't mind it not being animated, still would like more animated adaptations of books, but I think this will be it, and I'm very, very excited for the show because I think it's going to be sick. So anyway, let us get into the spoilery section of this book. If you haven't read it, then you know what's up, you know the drill, you need to get out of here because you're going to be spoiled. For those of you who have read the book and you want to discuss, this is our section, but please make sure to use a spoilery tag so you don't spoil others, and I will make sure to leave timestamps so you can, you know, skip and jump to whichever part you want to watch. All right, so I'm going to just kick off. We'll talk about where the book kicks off really for me, and that is where Lan dies and the turning point of the story. And I think, like I mentioned before that point, it was very meandering because it was kind of the mountain poking No Peaks clan here and there, kidnapping Andon a little bit. Poor Andon. I didn't mention him in the spoiler-free section, but he's just kind of here and there a little bit. Doesn't really play much of a big part into or until the end of the book anyway, where we have that big twist. But yeah, it's just really Aunt Madda flexing her muscles and doing what gangsters do, you know, running deals that are underhand. And I think I see where she's coming from in that she wants to create this or reunify the clan. Obviously, she wants to be the head of the clan, which isn't to everybody's taste because there are already several other heads. But I can kind of see where she's coming from in this kind of weird, misguided way that she's doing it, which is why I said I want her as our morally grey protagonist. But alas, we will not get that. So Lan's death is really where everything kind of kicked off in the story. It's where people actually finally started to do something in the book. Because for me, I really didn't understand what No Peaks did, because I know that they're kind of, it's peacetime, clan time, and so people are just kind of doing their business stuff and doing their thing. And I think because in my mind this book was Godfather inspired, I'm imagining No Peaks being a little bit more morally grey, doing underhanded things, and it just kind of seemed that they were very reactionary. And I think we kind of had a misstep there, because just how I wanted for the story to centre around Aunt Madda, we could have made them a little bit more on the grey side, and I think that could have made for a far more interesting book, because as it stands it was just kind of the No Peaks kids going about doing their thing. Shay was kind of confused. Family dynamic is a bit weird because their grandfather, who is I think he's got Alzheimer's. I don't think it was mentioned as him having that, but I think that's what he had. And so it's them dealing with this person who, on the outside, everybody knows him as the Torch of Kekon, this person with great power, and is now deteriorating and is becoming, you know, showing signs of his deterioration, and how the family is dealing with that on their side. And so I really just wanted us to do all the things that would come along with it being something that might be Godfather inspired. Now, like I said, I haven't watched The Godfather, so I don't know if this is how it kind of takes place, but in my mind we have more morally grey behaviour, people who are perhaps extorting people a bit, who are, doing things that you would expect from a story about organized crime. If you're telling me something is Godfather inspired, I'm thinking organized crime. But it was more so the No Peaks were trying to be a little bit more acceptable to society. And I think it could have ramped up the interest a bit more if we were a little bit more organised, crimey, you know? Can we also talk about how Hilo ruined Shay's moment when they were in mediation? So now, because things have kicked off and everyone's fighting, the government has now tried to mediate between the two clans. And Shay tells Hilo, this is what we're going to do. We've got this report back because we've done an audit of the jade, and we know that the mountain is stealing jade and they're making money this way. And on the final day of mediation, this is what we're going to do. And Hilo, being Hilo, throws out their wild card, their secret weapon, and uses it foolishly. And it just kind of summed up why I find him annoying. But I've got a quote from Aitmada which sums up my feelings perfectly about Hilo. Your brother is a dangerous, foolish man-child driven by pride and bloodlust. He would fight the last man on principle alone. It's what he knows how to do. And if there was ever a quote that summed up Hilo, it's this one. It sums him up perfectly, and it's probably why I'm not too fond of him as a character anyway. But what was the point in that? I didn't really understand why he did that, because what did you really gain from that? Because you're really ready to get stuff over and done with. You don't want to mediate. You don't want to do what you need to get done. And like all throughout it, he's like pointing out like, look at Aitmada, because she was the weatherman and knows how to conduct herself. You two, why don't you conduct yourself in the same way? Why don't you behave in the same way? I didn't have patience for him because he didn't have patience to try and improve himself, because I feel like Hilo is a character that kind of rests on being charismatic, but charisma will only really take you so far. Now, I'm going to talk about my favourite fight scene, or the bit at the end where Andon kind of dupes is it Gaunt? So at the very end of the book, Hilo has been told that essentially he should come and have this battle to the death, and you know, the mountain will absorb No Peaks, and you know, people can live or whatever. I can't remember what the stipulations were on that front. And then we had a little plot twist there where Andon goes and wears Hilo's jade and then destroys Gon. And I think the descriptions were phenomenal because we really got to see what jade could really do. And then obviously because of that, Andon decided to then renounce wearing jade in front of everybody at the school. He had to really choose that exact moment to decide that wearing jade really wasn't for him, which was, I understood his misgivings and I felt so bad for him because people weren't really listening to him. He was the son of somebody who got the itches, which the itches are when you are overly sensitive to jade and it begins to sort of deteriorate within you, so you kind of start itching yourself and eventually it kills you. And that's how his mother died, and his mother was known as the Mad Witch. This has always been a worry for him that he's going to end up like his mother. And Hilo, being Hilo, his answer to that was like, oh, that's fine, we'll just put you on drugs. And that's something that he didn't want, because seeing and knowing and having an inkling that Lan really actually died from an overdose of this drug, he didn't want to do it. And then when he renounces taking jade, because you know he's very powerful and he doesn't want to be used as a weapon, Hilo does his man-child thing and basically tells him to get out of his sight and calls him a mongrel and says he doesn't want to see him again, which of course he did. And I felt really bad for Andon because none of his concerns were really listened to, and as a character he was just, a lot of the time, was just kind of there. But I get the feeling that he's going to play more of a part in book 2. I really hope that we get more of a reprieve for Andon, because I do really like him as a character. Also, who didn't see Doru escaping? That was so very obviously going to happen. It was kind of like writing a gun into a story and not having it go off. Like it's going to go off at some point. And I don't understand how Shay, as smart as she is, didn't see that Doru was going to escape, because I knew, being that they'd taken off his jade from him and made a point to mention his jade withdrawals and how they'd taken off his jade, I didn't see how he wasn't not going to get jade from the grandfather, one way, shape or form. Now, they said that he would never steal the jade, and obviously the grandfather gave him his jade because he was being vindictive, but I saw him taking the jade, like some way, shape or form, he was going to get the jade from the grandfather. That was very obvious to me. And there were so many parts of the book where things were obviously going to happen. Like Shay was obviously going to put back on her jade. It's just unfortunate that it was because of her brother's death, that's, you know, that being the reason why she wore back her jade. I really wish they also resolved the issues between, or the friction between her and Hilo, because Hilo basically stopped talking to her because she moved to Espenia, and he kind of said, oh, I forgive you, but they didn't really talk that out in their relationship. So I don't know if that's going to be something that's discussed later on. I really do, or would like to see them have a heart-to-heart, sibling to sibling, and hash out their rivalries and the issues that they have, because the way that Hilo was being very dismissive of it, it was like he doesn't think things through. To be honest, I just don't like Hilo, okay? I don't like the way he deals with situations, but he didn't really think through how she, why she went and did those decisions. Yet here you are marrying a Stone Eye. If you're watching to the end, knowing what I've just told you, do you think it would be worth me to give this series a second go and read the second book? Because I just don't know what we could have, how we can like elongate this story in 3 books. Like I don't see it. So let me know if you think it's worth me carrying on, or perhaps not and just giving up. So folks, those were my thoughts on Jade City by Fonda Lee. As you can probably tell, wasn't for me. I wasn't really a big fan, and I don't really feel like there's a whole lot I can say about this story, because I just don't think there's a whole lot that really went on in the book. But you could have a different opinion to me, and you're welcome to leave that below. We can all discuss book 1. So folks, if you enjoyed that video, then please feel free to give the like button some love, and if you would like to see more from myself, you're more than welcome to subscribe, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye.